The night before the open mic event at Il Giardino, Los Angeles was wrapped in a strange, expectant silence that seemed to hum beneath the lives of those whose hearts were about to collide. It was the kind of evening when decisions made in passing could change everything, when a careless suggestion could open the door to danger, and when the quiet yearning of one person's soul could awaken old demons in another. At the center of this unraveling tapestry stood three people bound by circumstance and emotion: Taylor Hayes, Deke Sharp, and Daphne Rose, each facing a test that would measure not only their faith in others, but their faith in themselves. And through it all, Steffy Forrester, ever the catalyst for transformation, moved the pieces into place, unaware that her well-intentioned nudge would set in motion a night that could change her family's destiny. Taylor had spent the morning in quiet contemplation, her coffee untouched, the scent of roasted beans rising like memories she didn't want to confront. Years of guiding others through their crises had taught her the fragile art of restraint. Yet her own restraint had become a cage, polished, professional, airtight. Steffy's words echoed in her mind. "You need to get out, Mom. Go to the open mic night. Meet someone new." Taylor had smiled then, her daughter's enthusiasm both touching and terrifying. The idea of meeting someone new felt almost alien. Her life had been devoted to fixing, healing, and analyzing others. To step into the unpredictability of romance again, especially in a world still orbiting the chaos of Deacon Sharp and Sheila Carter, was a risk she wasn't sure she wanted to take. But love, or at least the whisper of its possibility, has a way of haunting even the most disciplined minds. At Forrester Creations, the hum of sewing machines and the sharp scent of fabrics were drowned by another kind of tension. Daphne Rose, radiant yet guarded, leaned against Carter Walton's office doorway. Her eyes held that curious mix of warmth and distance that had always drawn Carter in. He'd built a reputation as the man of honor, steadfast, sincere, but too many of his relationships had burned out under the heat of other people's shadows. Hope Logan had been one of those shadows. Daphne knew it, and every time she saw that flicker of regret in Carter's expression when Hope's name surfaced, she felt the familiar sting of being compared to a ghost. So she tested him, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. Her challenge was simple: prove to me that I'm not a substitute, that your heart beats here and now, not in the echo of someone else's name. For Daphne, this wasn't a game, it was a matter of survival. If Carter failed this test, she would rather walk away than become another chapter in his long list of near misses. Carter understood the gravity behind her words. He'd spent his life trying to do the right thing, to be the man who steadied others. But somewhere in that constant effort to be good, he'd forgotten how to fight for himself. Daphne's demand forced him to face the uncomfortable truth that reassurance wasn't enough. She needed proof, real proof, that he could prioritize her over his own image, over his doubts, and over his lingering guilt. It wasn't enough to speak of love. He had to show it. As she turned away from his office, her perfume trailing like a promise, Carter felt the sharp sting of realization. If he failed to rise to her challenge, he wouldn't just lose a woman. He'd lose his last chance to learn what true devotion meant. Across town, Deke Sharp's day began with a restless sense of suspicion. He'd inherited his father's charm, but not his father's faith. Deacon's reconciliation with Sheila Carter had baffled everyone, including Deke, who had watched the chaos of that relationship unfold with disgust. When Deke learned that his father's couples therapy had been guided by none other than Dr. Taylor Hayes, his curiosity turned to doubt. Why would someone as intelligent as Taylor encourage his father to give Sheila another chance? Was it professional ethics, or something more personal? And so Deke decided to confront her. The question that burned in him wasn't just about psychology. It was about loyalty, truth, and the uneasy possibility that his father's heart was being steered by motives no one understood. When Deke arrived at Taylor's office that afternoon, he carried the veneer of calm, but beneath it pulsed the raw impatience of a man who had already decided he wouldn't like the answers he was about to hear. Taylor greeted him with her usual composure, her tone professional, but Deke's eyes were sharp. He asked her directly, "Why did you tell my father to stay with Sheila?" Why encourage a union that could destroy him? Taylor felt the questions strike like a physical blow. She wanted to explain the complexity of human healing, the delicate balance between empathy and accountability, but how could she make Deke understand that she'd seen something redeemable in Deacon, something fragile that deserved one last chance? Instead, she spoke carefully, choosing words that protected confidentiality while hinting at compassion. But Deke wasn't satisfied. He saw the flicker in her eyes when she mentioned Deacon's name, the warmth that betrayed her professionalism. And in that moment, suspicion turned into certainty. Taylor's concern for Deacon wasn't just clinical. It was personal. By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the city in molten gold, Taylor's equilibrium was fractured. Deke's questions had cut deep, exposing truths she wasn't ready to admit even to herself. She had cared for Deacon more than she should have. His vulnerability had drawn her in, his sincerity had disarmed her, and somewhere between sessions and silences, she had begun to see not just a patient, but a man fighting to redeem his life. And now, knowing Sheila's volatile nature, she feared that any hint of connection between her and Deacon could become dangerous. Steffi's invitation to the open mic night, meant as a gesture of liberation, suddenly felt like a summons to temptation and possibly to destruction. That evening, Steffi's optimism filled the Forrester mansion like bright light through glass. She had no idea of the storm her suggestion had stirred. For her, the open mic night at Il Giardino was a harmless outing, a way for her mother to reconnect with joy, to rediscover spontaneity. Steffi had spent too long watching Taylor live behind walls of professionalism, giving advice to others while denying herself any spark of romance. She wanted to see her mother dance again, laugh again, to remind her that life wasn't meant to be endured but lived. When she saw Taylor hesitate, she teased gently, her smile radiant and her voice full of warmth. But Taylor's smile was thin, her eyes distant. Inside, she wrestled with an unease she couldn't name. Still, she agreed to go, partly out of love for her daughter and partly out of a quiet desire to feel alive again, even if only for one night. At Il Giardino, the open mic event unfolded like a dream spun from candlelight and music. The terrace glowed with soft lanterns, and the hum of conversation mingled with the strum of a guitar. Taylor arrived in a simple yet elegant dress, her composure fragile but luminous. When she entered, heads turned, not because of fame, but because she radiated that calm beauty that comes from strength tempered by sorrow. Steffi, delighted, watched from across the room as her mother accepted a glass of wine. She thought, for a fleeting second, that maybe everything would be fine. But fate, in soap opera fashion, has a talent for turning serenity into suspense. Unbeknownst to Steffi, Deacon Sharp had also arrived, drawn by nostalgia for the place he'd once called his second home. And where Deacon went, danger often followed, cloaked in the name Sheila Carter. The two former lovers had been attempting a fragile reconciliation, one Taylor had gently, perhaps foolishly, encouraged. But as Deacon entered the courtyard and caught sight of Taylor beneath the moonlit canopy, something shifted. He smiled, softly, uncertainly, and she, despite every rational warning in her mind, smiled back. It was a moment suspended in air, a whisper of what could have been, or might still be. Music swelled around them, and as though pulled by invisible threads, they found themselves sharing a slow dance beneath the soft spill of light. It was innocent, maybe even therapeutic, but in the eyes of someone like Sheila, innocence was an illusion waiting to be shattered. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the terrace, unseen and simmering, Sheila watched. The sight of Taylor's hand resting lightly on Deacon's shoulder ignited something feral within her. For Sheila, love was possession, not partnership, and betrayal was an unforgivable sin. Her mind twisted the scene into treachery, her breath quickening with fury. Taylor, the woman who had dared to guide her therapy, was now the woman daring to steal her man. By the time Deacon and Taylor's dance ended, a quiet threat had already been born in the darkness. If Taylor Hayes thought she could meddle in Sheila Carter's life without consequences, She was wrong. While the storm gathered outside, another kind brewed across the room. Carter Walton arrived late, still wrestling with the echo of Daphne's ultimatum. He saw her near the bar, laughing with colleagues, her silver dress catching the candlelight like ripples on water. Every instinct pulled him to walk away, to give her space until she decided he was worth trusting. But Carter had spent too many years being passive in love. He approached her quietly, and when she turned to face him, he spoke not in declarations but in actions, ordering her favorite drink without being asked, listening more than speaking, showing her through every gesture that she was the only one who mattered in that moment. Daphne watched him, her guard slowly softening. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe this man, this patient, steady soul, might actually be willing to fight for her. Back near the dance floor, Taylor felt Deacon's warmth fade as the song ended. They stepped apart, the air charged with a delicate mix of nostalgia and regret. Deacon's eyes softened with gratitude, but before he could speak, Taylor sensed the weight of a gaze burning from the periphery. She turned, and though she couldn't see Sheila clearly, she felt her presence, like a chill crawling up her spine. A lifetime of psychology told her to rationalize it away, to dismiss it as imagination. But her instincts screamed otherwise. Sheila Carter was out there, watching, waiting. Meanwhile, Steffi noticed the shift in her mother's expression and immediately assumed it was emotional turmoil, not physical danger. She moved to her side, encouraging her to stay a bit longer, to let go of whatever guilt she was carrying. Steffi's voice was bright, her eyes full of hope, unaware that the very night she'd orchestrated for joy might soon turn deadly. Taylor forced a smile for her daughter's sake, promising to stay a little while longer. But the unease in her chest grew heavier, her professional instincts warning that something was wrong, terribly wrong. As the event continued, Deke Sharp appeared, his timing precise as fate. He had come seeking closure after their earlier confrontation, still unsatisfied with Taylor's guarded answers. But when he saw his father dancing with her under the lights, the meaning of their earlier conversation shifted in his mind. Perhaps Taylor wasn't the manipulator he thought. Perhaps she was simply another lost soul orbiting his father's gravitational pull. He approached her cautiously, intent on an apology, but what he found instead was a woman trembling on the edge of fear. Taylor's hand shook slightly as she set down her glass. Deke followed her gaze and saw nothing, no threat, no movement, just the shadowed garden beyond the terrace. Still, something in her eyes convinced him to stay close. It was a rare moment of empathy from a man who had learned to expect betrayal everywhere he looked. Hours later, when the crowd thinned and laughter faded into the rhythm of night, Taylor excused herself, stepping outside for a breath of air. The moonlight filtered through the olive trees, casting long, trembling shadows across the stone path. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady her thoughts. The night had been beautiful in its simplicity, yet haunted by a sense of impending consequence. Somewhere behind her, footsteps echoed, soft, deliberate, almost musical. For a heartbeat, she thought it might be Deacon, coming to say goodnight. But when she turned, the garden was empty. Still, the air felt charged, heavy with unspoken menace. Inside, Deke caught sight of Sheila leaving through the far gate, her face pale under the streetlight, her expression unreadable. A chill ran through him. He didn't know exactly what she had seen, but he knew Sheila well enough to understand that obsession and jealousy were twin serpents in her mind. He made a mental note to warn his father, but by the time he reached for his phone, Sheila had vanished into the night. Steffi called her mother early, eager to know whether she'd enjoyed the event. Taylor reassured her, voice calm, though her mind remained clouded with unease. She didn't mention the strange feeling in the garden, or the shadow that had followed her home in thought if not in form. To protect her daughter, she said nothing. But as she hung up, she couldn't shake the sense that her life had shifted again, as though an invisible thread had been pulled, unraveling something she could no longer control. Meanwhile, Carter woke to a text from Daphne. "You surprised me last night. Maybe you are the man I've been waiting for." It was simple, tentative, but it made his chest tighten with something close to joy. He had passed the first test, though he knew there would be others. For Daphne, love was earned slowly, through consistency, not grand gestures. And for Carter, who had spent years giving too much too soon, this was a new rhythm, one he was determined to learn. Across town, Deke confronted his father over breakfast at Il Giardino. Deacon was cheerful, his optimism disarming, but Deke's warning cut through the pleasantries. "Sheila saw you with Taylor last night," he said, his tone edged with worry. The color drained from Deacon's face. He knew Sheila's capacity for vengeance. The idea that Taylor Hayes, compassionate, brilliant, and undeserving of such wrath, could become collateral damage filled him with dread. In that instant, he understood what Taylor must have felt when she encouraged him to make peace with Sheila, compassion laced with fear. He resolved to protect Taylor, even if it meant putting himself in danger once again. And so, as the day unfolded, each of them carried a piece of the night before. Steffi, glowing with the satisfaction of seeing her mother smile again, remained blissfully unaware of the peril she had unknowingly set in motion. Carter, inspired by Daphne's tentative trust, felt hope returning to a heart that had almost forgotten what love could feel like. Deke, wrestling with the weight of new knowledge, began to understand that sometimes the truth isn't meant to be exposed but guarded. And Taylor, calm on the surface, storm beneath, faced the dawning realization that her choices, born from kindness, might have painted a target on her back. The bold and the beautiful has